Hey, Judy.
Hi, good evening.
How you doing tonight?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Pretty good. So my computer froze, so I need a second to work the problem. There we go. Good evening, one and all. I wanted to just give a little talk tonight about taluses or talitot. Really start at the beginning, do just some vocabulary about what the different parts of the talus are. We'll look at the origin of the mitzvah and some of the possible meanings. We'll do a bit of zoology. We'll look at the different flavors and types of taluses that are available. And we're going to talk about the revival of kellet. If you don't know what kellet is right now, don't worry, you will in just a few moments. We're going to ask who is obligated in this mitzvah. Is anyone obligated in this mitzvah? One of the interesting things about this might be a mitzvah that no one is actually obligated in. And we're going to close with a little bit of fun, getting to second base with your talit. And hopefully you'll be clear when we get to the end what I mean from that. Just to start, though, at the most basic level, that has some questions of vocabulary. The first thing that we should be aware of, if we aren't aware of, is that talit and talus are the same word. That if somebody can say go grab your talus and go grab your talit. Talus is simply the Ashkenazi pronunciation, and talit is the Sephardi pronunciation, or the modern Hebrew pronunciation. In the same way that we might say Good Shabbos as opposed to Shabbat, different Jews pronounce the same words a little bit differently. So talus and talit are the same thing. And usually when we are referring to a talus, we're referring to the whole thing, to the entire garment, to the large piece of fabric that may or may not have stripes. The racing stripes are optional. You can have any design on a talus, but also the fringes, which are in the bottom thing, the little strands that go off it. So when we talk about a talus, we say, bring me a talus, or get your talus on, or talit, we're talking about the whole thing. The plurals are also different. We'll call the more than one talit, we'll call them talitot, or we'll call them talisim. This is the same difference between Ashkenazi and Sephardi. The tzitzit themselves are the fringes, and there's more than I should have grabbed my talus here to hold up to the camera, but there's fringes all over the talus if you look at it. But on the corners, there's the strings that go down, the four sets of the strings. Those are what we mean when we talk about the tzitzit. Those are the things in the lower panel. And when we say techelet, we're talking about the strand that's dyed blue. Now, most of the taluses that you see, the talisim that you see, they don't have the blue strand, so they don't have the techelet. but increasingly more do. And so we'll have to talk a little bit about how this custom was revived. For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, Jews wore taluses without kellet, and the aspect of the blue was lost, but it has made a revival in our time. So that's the vocabulary that I just wanted to go through before we start to talk about the origin and the mitzvah of these things. The talus is the whole thing. The tzitzit are the long fringes that are at four corners of them, and the techelet is the blue strand, if you have indeed a blue strand in your talus. This is it's convenient because the mitzvah is included in a paragraph of scripture that we recite twice a day in synagogue, and we sing it together. It's the third paragraph of the Shema. So when we'll just sing it. I'll sing it. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber b'nei Yisrael v'amata alehem, v'asu lahem tzitzit. Those are the tzitzit. Al kanfei vigdeihem ledor, dam v'natnu al tzitzit. There's that word again. Hakanaf patil techelet, and that's the word for the blue. Wehaya lakem tzitzit oritem oto, uskartem mikom mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam, v'lo tatoru acharei davavkem v'acharei einechem, asher atem zonim achareihem. And in English, the Lord said to Moses as follows: speak to the children of Israel, translated here, the Israelite people, and instruct them to make for themselves fringes, tzitzit, on the corners of their garments throughout the ages, and let them attach a cord of blue, kellet, to the fringe at each corner. That will be your fringe. Look at it and recall all of the commandments of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. You've got to watch out for those lustful urges. So, but this is, if it's very convenient to have a mitzvah that is from a text that is hopefully familiar to most of us. And you'll see in the synagogue, when we recite this paragraph, many people grab the tzitzit in their hands, and you'll see some people kissing. You'll see them making out with their talus, and we'll describe why some people do that later on. But it brings into our minds something that happens in synagogue every Shabbat morning, or every morning when we gather to say the Shema. The commandment of the tzitzit is also the star of the longest seder. I know that every seder we go to, we think it's the longest seder, but the longest seder we read about before we eat, the 5 rabbis that stayed up all night at Bnei Brak, and they were arguing about something. And part of what they're arguing about was whether or not we should recite this third paragraph of the Shema in the evening. There were some people that didn't think that we should recite it in the evening because the mitzvah of the talus is visual. It says, that shall be your friends, look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them. Well, if it's dark, you can't look at them. Well, you could look at them, but you won't see them. And so there was an argument. One of the arguments that they had at this very long Seder was, do we really recite the third paragraph of the Shema in the evening? And the answer, as it turns out, is yes, we do. Even though the third paragraph talks about tzitzit, it also talks, which we don't do at night, it talks about the Exodus from Egypt, which is the theme of the seder. And it's a commandment to remember the exodus of Egypt, all the days of your life, which includes all of the nights. And so we have this, this is a very famous paragraph. When we look at what the written Torah tells us about this mitzvah, we have a lot of questions because it speaks very generally, as the scripture often does. It tells them to make fringes. It doesn't say what to make them out of. It says put them on their garments. It doesn't say which sort of garments. And so this is something that we require extensive use of the oral Torah, that thing that we study on Monday nights with Rabbi Boron, that the oral Torah comes to fill in the details of the written Torah. It's just like the written Torah says everyone should make a sukkah and live in it for a week during the holiday of Sukkot. Okay, so what's a sukkah? How big is it? What can it be made out of? We rely on the oral law to answer those questions, and we rely on the oral law to answer questions like which garments require tzitzit? How many sets of tzitzit do you need? How many strings do you need per set? And what are tzitzit made of? And the oral law, it comes to the rescue and it answers the questions. Which garments require a tzitzit? Four-cornered garments made from natural fibers that cover the torso. So the dress shirt that I have on this evening only has two corners. And it's not a four-cornered garment, it's a two-cornered garment, so it's exempt from tzitzit. The garments that were worn in antiquity, togas, generally had four corners. So it was more likely to require to have tzitzit on something that you were wearing to go to the bank or to go drive your kids to school or something. How many sets of tzitzit? Well, we do four. We have one on every corner. How many strings per set? Well, you need at least two because you need the white one and you need the blue one. And what are tzitzit to be made of? What they're to be made of is wool. And so we have all of these rules from the rabbis that tell us exactly how to make the tallis, and we'll look at various varieties later. But the instructions of what a tallis should be is given to us from the oral Torah, not from the written Torah. And it's also, so we always ask the question, well, what's the meaning of this mitzvah? Why do we do that? And for some mitzvot, it's not easy to know. And what's the meaning of the mitzvah of circumcision, cutting off the foreskin of our sons on the 8th day? Well, very famously, we're not sure what the meaning of that is. We have ideas, but it's a commandment that's given to for us to be obedient to, even though we don't understand it. But in the case of tzitzit, Scripture tells us explicitly what the meaning is. It says, look at it and recall all of the commandments of the Lord and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes and your lustful urges. And that's to say that with the point of the mitzvah, the meaning of the mitzvah is that we have something to look at that's going to remind us to do the commandments. So we have very happily the explanation in the Bible, why we do it, why this was commanded, that we should have a reminder of to what to do. Another mitzvah that's very similar to this is the mitzvah of tefillin, which is when we discussed that the tefillin are the leather straps and the boxes. We put one on our arm and we put one on our forehead. And these two are to provide reminders as we go throughout the day of what to do. The arm tefillin is supposed to restrain our actions, and the head tefillin is supposed to help us keep Torah on our minds at all times. The requirement of tzitzit is very similar. We have, though, with tzitzit, another reason that is not given explicitly in the Torah, but is sort of arrived at by scholars that try to look at it and say, well, what's going on here? Blue was the color of royalty in antiquity, that kings wore blue garments. And the Kohanim, the priests in the sanctuary, they wore garments that also had this royal blue in it. That also had a tzitzit and also had the kellet. And part of the idea of this is what they call the democratization of the faith, and that appears even in the Hebrew Bible. We think of the rabbis as the great who made Judaism democratic, because the rabbis came to rule in place of the priest, and the priests were aristocrats. And whereas the priests were all off in their own, doing their thing in their own world, the rabbi said, well, everyone's going to do this. Well, the Bible already says that everyone's going to do this. The commandments given explicitly to the children of Israel. And the idea is that when we wear these things, that we're supposed to remind ourselves that even though we have Kohanim, even though we have priests, that we are supposed to be a nation of priests. That Judaism is something that's expressed by the habits and the customs of the people themselves, and not the way that the priests conduct themselves, and nothing that the priests do. And it's a very interesting aspect of the commandment of Tzitzit, is that the rules for shatnez are relaxed for this. Shatnez is the requirement given in Deuteronomy. You shall not wear clothes combining wool and linen, that you're not supposed to mix garments. And if you, when I lived in New York, and you went to the better clothing stores that were owned by Jews, they would say that, well, we were strict about shatnez here. The garments you buy are not going to contain a forbidden mixture of garments. But right after the Torah gives the instruction of no shatnez, don't mix wool and linen, it says, you shall make tassels on the four corners of the garment in which you cover yourselves. And because these verses are given together, the rabbis say that the second verse comes to make an exception to the first verse. That's to say that you should be careful. You need to observe shatnez, but for your tzitzit, it's an exception. That's to say that if you have a linen robe, which was very common, and we know that tzitzit are made out of wool, you might think that I can't put the wool tzitzit on the linen garment. But for the talit shatnez is allowed. That's an exception that's made, and it's an exception that's made for the priests as they operate in the sanctuary as well. And so that when we wear the talis, when we wear the tzitzit, not only do we take on the color that's associated with royalty and associated with priesthood, but we also indulge in the priestly prerogative to not follow the rules of shatnez, to not follow the rules of the mixing of the garments. And so we carry around with us when we wear the tzitzit, we're an aspect of being a priest, that we're exempt from the rules of shatnez in the same manner that the priests, the Kohanim, are exempt from the rules of shatnez. So this is the origin of the mitzvah and the meaning of the mitzvah. You know, every mitzvah has a different meaning for every Jew that does it. I mean, many of us have our own explanations for the meaning of tzitzit, and we should probably spend a moment to talk about them amongst ourselves. But there's carried along with it, you do have the explicit meaning that's given in Scripture, which is to say, you look at the tzitzit to remember all of the commandments. And you also have, when we also wear the tzitzit, we remember that for Jews, we're a nation of priests. That for every Jew has the opportunity to exercise certain priestly prerogatives, and that includes explicitly all men. And as we'll talk about later, in terms of talis, and I think it's obviously includes women as well. though like everything else, there's going to be controversies about that, and different communities are going to do different things. So that's really the first 40-50% of the presentation. But we're going to do the zoology. We're going to talk about kissing the tzitzit. We're going to talk about a few other things, who's obligated. But before we go further, I just wanted to open up, what's your, or to the people here who wear a talit, what's your personal meaning of it? What do you carry with it, or if you have questions about the things that I tried to bring to it, we could take a moment and talk about those.
So where does the blue come from? In ancient times, where did they get the blue?
The blue probably came from a particular snail, and I have a photo of the snail that later in the presentation. For some reason, after the period of the rabbis, after antiquity, Jews lost the confidence that they knew where the blue came from. And after antiquity, it was not the custom for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was not the custom to have the blue strand because people were not convinced that they had the correct one. The last century saw a long process of argument and debate about it, and we think we know what it is now. And so we're moving forward on that. But and the dye that we use today is from the snail that it's called chilazon in Hebrew. There's a Latin name that's on the slide, but I don't remember it. So, but that's the short answer. We believe that even in antiquity, that it was the snail that was the thing that was used to make the blue dye.
Okay.
So why today I see some are wearing talit that is with black stripes or even with red purple stripes and not kellet? From what?
The custom of wearing blue stripes on the tallis, as far as we can tell, really begins in Sfat, around the time that the great mystics were in business. People like the Ari, we're talking about the 16th, 17th century. And it was possibly an intention to try to have a representation of blueness, even though they weren't convinced that they had the correct shade or the correct color. But it was probably more basic than at that time, because of mysticism. Blue became identified with Shekhinah and Tiferet and the sky and God. And at that point, you see blue used quite a bit more in banners and on talisim and in a lot of things. So that's the moment that blue started to be used. But there's no requirement to have any color whatsoever on a tallis. And so some people don't use blue. I think there are groups that prefer the black stripes. Chabad is very big on black stripes. You can use, though, any design on the tallis, because the point of it is not that the design has a particular meaning. The point is that if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you have to have tzitzit on it, whatever the design is. If I have a four-cornered garment that has a representation of dogs playing poker on it, I'm required to put tzitzit on that garment. So, but the blue is not necessarily related to kellet when it's on the tallis itself, though it's probably hoping to channel that, and there are other customs.
Now, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering, what is really the difference between kahol and kellet, or is kahol not is that a modern Hebrew term? Is that not a biblical term? What is there a difference?
The kellet is described as the royal blue, which is a darker blue. It's or a dark and purple blue. So it's distinct from kahol in modern Hebrew. I don't know when we I don't know if the colors that we have in modern Hebrew. I mean, obviously, some of them go back to biblical rabbinic Hebrew, like Adom or others. There are others that were probably put together by our friend Eliezer ben Yehuda as he revived the language. And he chose kahol rather than kellet. But if in modern Hebrew, the difference is kahol is like just normal blue and kellet is the royal blue. It's a purple blue.
Mhm.
Actually, kellet is more like a lighter shade of blue, in like the sky. The sky is kellet.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I was just wondering if there was a significance to it. Thank you.
Mhm. Now, some are wearing Tlat Katan, means under the garment they have like a talit. From where is this mitzvah? And if you are wearing a Tlat Katan, do you need to wear both of them?
So when we do the zoology of the taluses and the and everything, I have photos of all those things, and I'll talk about the origin of the Tlat Katan at that time. So I think it'll just be easier when people are looking at when we're looking at it all together to deal with that. I think Sarah typed in a question: when do you begin to wear one as a child after a milestone event? Is the privilege earned? And that also we will get to that. We will get to that. But I just
I
wanted.
had a comment in terms of the custom now that women will wear a tali. To me, it's always a men's garment, and I was never really comfortable with the idea, even though very many women wear one. So I decided that I would try to make one so that it would be meaningful to me. And I took a shawl that had been my mother's, and I bought the fringes to put in each of the four corners. But the bottom line is I still don't feel comfortable. It's still to me something that only men wear.
Comfort is important. Comfort is important. It plays into a lot of what we do. I didn't get the kellet. I didn't get the blue string for my talis for many years because I felt uncomfortable doing it. My rabbi didn't use them, and his rabbis didn't use them, and a lot of people at the seminary would make a mean face if they saw somebody that was unlearned like me, strutting around in a look who's wearing kellet, look who's fancy. So the comfort's important. And we all respond to it. I think that many people who take the plunge, both with wearing the talus and with wearing the talus with the kellet, I think that many people who take the plunge find that the waters are inviting. That it takes some getting used to. There are things that I don't, when we show a Tlat Katan, I've never worn one, and I would feel uncomfortable wearing one because I think it's for religious Jews, and I don't see myself as that religious. So we have to honor each other's feelings in these matters.
And I have another story to tell. Before my son's bar mitzvah and just before my daughters had theirs, we went down to the Lower East Side because, New York, so you go down to the Lower East Side to buy a talit. And it was a lovely experience, particularly for my son, because again, they're more welcoming of men than they were of women. They tossed over him and showed him the different, like you're saying, the different colors he could have. And it was just a very welcoming experience. And I think back to all the things that he did, we did as a family to prepare. And it was one of the nicest things that we did, in getting ready.
It really is a milestone in a couple of situations. Usually people purchase a nice one for a bar or bat mitzvah. Another occasion that people purchase one is for a wedding, not because the groom usually wears a tallis, but the groom's allowed to wear a tallis. But often we use it for the top of the chuppah. So one of the talisim that I own was actually my chuppah that I was married in. And it's nice to carry that association, to think about my wedding and to think about my family and how lucky I am when I put that on to go to a sermon or something. So
I made my children's talis for their bar and bat mitzvah, and they don't use them, so now I wear them. And I never wore one until I came to Beth Israel, but I thought, if you get an aliyah, you should wear one.
yeah, our policy is not to require women to wear them even for aliyot, but I recommend it if people are willing to. I think people ultimately find it meaningful, though it is the first time, maybe the first couple times. I think it feels strange to do it. So I'll press on, and if I failed to get to some points that I promised to make in this questions, you hold me accountable after the next little segment. And so so that's a little bit of what I call the zoology, and we start with the old school tallis that. In antiquity, and into the Middle Ages for Sephardim, the tallis just meant a garment, and it was just referring to the robe that people would wear and would have four corners. And so, on the hem of the toga, people would tie the tzitzit to it. And this is a little shocking to people because it means that the tzitzit were certainly dragged in the dirt when people were wearing them, that people did not at that time have the same sort of sensitivity that we have of treating the tzitzit themselves as something holy, but it was simply something that you attached to the garments that you wore. It was not designed, it's not conceived of in the Talmud or in the early codes as something that you put on to pray. That it's not originally something that was designed to be in the synagogue. It was just, well, if you have a four-cornered garment, and you probably will if you live around the Mediterranean and antiquity, if you have a toga, there's a requirement for you to put them on. So unless you had a special toga that you wore to the synagogue, there wasn't the relationship between the tallis and it wasn't a prayer shawl, which is the way that it has kind of become in the modern Jewish imagination. It was just something that was worn. The starting in around the 10th and 11th century in Northern Europe and Ashkenaz, the custom did arise, probably because in Northern France it's a little cold to wear a toga for a lot of the year, that there was a garment designed specifically for use in prayer called when we call this the Tlat Gadol. And this is what we wear to synagogue today. And these are these large garments, usually with stripes of some kind. They could be blue stripes, they could be any stripes. The design is not particularly important, but these are garments that are designated for use in prayer, that have the tzitzit, simply because in those environments and in our environments, you don't usually wear a four-cornered garment. And it's therefore, in order to keep the mitzvah alive, we had to develop a garment that we would wear. And this is the and this is what it looks like. In Ashkenaz, the custom was for men after they became married to wear the Tlat Gadol. That if you and to this day there are Ashkenazi congregations where men who are unmarried do not wear them. There was, when I was a counselor in summer camp, we don't care what your customs are, we make you wear the tallis and the tefillin. But there was a counselor who had a tallis that his family gave him, and they told him, you can't wear this until you get married. And so we solved the problem that I gave him my tallis to wear and I wore his, so that he would have a tallis on, and he didn't violate the instruction of his parents not to wear that particular tallis until he got married. But and of course, and because of misogyny, because of the way that society was, this was a garment that exclusively men would wear in Ashkenazi synagogues and the like when they were older. For minors, so that people could have the practice of doing it, or so that people would just have the ability to wear tzitziot when they're not in synagogue. There was this invention of the Tlat Katan, the small tallis, which is like an undershirt or an undergarment with four corners, and the tallis is, and the tzitzit go out to the side. And you can see the gentleman reading the sports section in his seder. There, he's has his tzitzit out. You see, he has a garment under it, and he has his tzitzit out for display. There are different feelings in the religious community about whether you should have your tzitzit out or your tzitzit in. As I said, the Tlat Katan is something that I've never taken on to wear myself, but if one's interested in doing it, there's lots of options that you can find on the internet. As Sarah asked, at what age does this begin? And until recently, this was something that was very different in the Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities, that Ashkenazim tend to put the Tlat Katan on children, on boys when they're quite young, when they're 3 or 4 years old, usually at their upshuren, their first haircut. They'll also be given a Tlat Katan to wear. Sephardim really don't groove to that practice. I mean, they hold the talit as something that really pious and religious people wear, and it's they don't like the fact that a child who's 4 or 5, who's going to be playing in the dirt or whatever it is they play in, is going to have this thing on. And so among Ashkenazim, you see kids of all ages with their tzitzit often hanging out. They're playing baseball in them. They're doing whatever they're doing in them. So Sephardim have usually been more careful in wearing the Tlat Katan. But it's more and more the differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim have vanished, and it's not uncommon in the Sephardi world today for youngsters to be given the Tlat Katan to wear. The question of how to tie the tzitzit, it's important. I mean, if you went through all of the tzitzit in our synagogue, I think that we'd probably find that, except for mine, they're all tied exactly the same way. And they're all tied in the manner that on this thing, it's called under the heading of Ari Radzin. That's the pattern based on, I think, how Rashi used to tie his tallis. But there are different patterns, and the point is really, and they have arguments and the reasons for each one, but the point that they all have in common is that they're tied in a way to display the blue as best as you can if you have the blue. The thread that goes around is always the blue thread, because it's the blue that people wish to see, that people wish to be visible. But there's no one correct way to tie the strings of the tzitzit on your tallis. There are a lot of different ways, and when you combine the fact that the strings can be tied in a lot of different ways, and you combine the fact that there are so many different styles and ways you can make a four-cornered garment, there can have a considerable diversity in how these things look. And I think that diversity is a good thing. I like the fact that in our synagogue, we have a good number of tie-dyed talisim as well as to the store-bought ones. And it's really an opportunity for people that want to have the practice of hidlor mitzvah, making a mitzvah beautiful, to apply their craft and their creativity into making something that's both appealing to look at but something that is distinctive. The kellet, as I said, from the time of the Talmud on, it was thought to be lost. And when you read the codes when you read the rules of tzitzit from the Middle Ages, it's basically assumed that you don't have kellet. The instructions are given as though we have kellet. And even though all of the strands are white, if you look at the way that they're tied, you'll see that they're tied in a way that if there was kellet there, the kellet would be visible. And that it's really one of the weird things that even though the art of making the kellet was lost for hundreds of years, the way that it was tied never lost sight of the fact that the reason that we tie the tzitzit in a certain ways is that we want to display them. We want to display the blue. About at the beginning of the 20th century, there were two attempts to revive the practice of kellet with cuttlefish. It was a certain fish that if you it had organs, and if you mushed them up, you could make a dye out of it that was blue. And one of the proponents of the cuttlefish as a use of kellet was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, Chaim Herzog, Buchi Herzog's grandfather. Buchi Herzog's the new president of Israel. And his grandfather Chaim Herzog had a degree in marine biology that he used to investigate all of the different possibilities of kellet. And he came up with the idea of the cuttlefish. It was always controversial and people didn't really by it. We believe that after decades of argument and scholarship that we know the snail that's the basis of the dye for kellet, the Hexaplex trunculus snail, which is found off of the coast of Haifa. And there are yeshivot in Israel, Ma'ale Adumim is one of them, which have devoted themselves to cultivating the snail and to making gallons and gallons, vats and vats of kellet, that have permitted us to dye the string blue again. And it's and I don't think there's really much controversy that we have the right snail. But as we spoke about earlier, comfort is a matter of importance here. Just as a woman might feel awkward putting a tallis on because it's always been seen as a man's garment, the Jews will feel discomfort putting on the kellet because the tradition for as long back as anyone can remember has been to not use it. And our greatest rabbis did not wear kellet in their seats on their tzitzit. Maimonides didn't use kellet. The Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, didn't use kellet. My teachers did not use kellet. And there's a real reluctance to say that we're doing something that if the strands without the kellet were good enough for our teachers, why aren't they good enough for us? Why do we have to set ourselves apart? Why do we have to be different in doing it? And there's considerable sociological pressure to not use it, therefore. But I think that that's dwindling. I think that it's in congregations of all of all of flavors of Judaism. You see more and more to kellet in the tzitzit. And if anyone's interested in adding it to theirs, I'd be happy to direct you to where to get some and and how to tie them on. It's not inexpensive. It cost about $80 for 4 strings that you put on your tzitzit. So when I did all of mine, I had 4 taluses. So it was a couple $100 to get them all to do it. But it's I mean, to me, it really beautifies the mitzvah, and I have complete confidence that we have found that the people who know what they're doing, who say they know what they're doing with this, in fact, do know what they're doing with it, and that we have recovered in our time the ability to do this this important mitzvah. Who, if anyone, is obligated in this mitzvah? And this is where the mitzvah is really very different than something like tefillin or other things where we have a sense that an individual is required to do is. No one is really obligated to ever wear tzitzit. The mitzvah of tzitzit does not fall on the individual, it falls on a garment. If you don't wear a 4-cornered garment your entire life, therefore you never wear tzitzit, you haven't done anything wrong. There's no mitzvah to go out and try to find a 4-cornered garment and do the mitzvah if you're not doing it otherwise. And so when we talk about, usually when we talk about tefillin, well, we go into this, well, men are obligated, but what's the status of women? Men and women, their obligation here is the same. Neither is obligated. But the sense is that we go out of our way to put ourselves in this position of having to do a mitzvah, that we want to elevate our prayer with this practice, and therefore we take it upon ourselves to do it. And there's simply no sense that a woman taking it upon herself to do this is in any different position than a man is to take it upon himself. Men and women are equally obligated in this. That's to say that neither men and women are obligated, but they each have the opportunity. You do run into arguments about the Tlat Gadol, a men's garment. There's a sense of halakha that men and women should dress distinctively, that a woman should not put on a man's garment. But it's, I don't want to speak disrespectfully of the communities that hold to that, but I think that's nuts. I think that nobody, men or women, goes around wearing 4-cornered garments these days. The only time you see this is at a synagogue. And yes, it's true that sociologically, the main participants in synagogues forever have been men, and men have segregated themselves and put themselves on a higher plane. But if we've decided that we don't want to do that anymore, if we've decided that's not the sociology that we want to bind us, there's really no halakhic bar whatsoever to a woman wearing either a Tlat Gadol or a Tlat Katan. It's something that we take on ourselves to do that we don't have to do. And in this regard, there's no reason from my point of view to treat men and women differently in that regard. A final note that I wanted to share, because we see this in synagogue, this is getting to second base with your talus. And this is an excerpt from our prayer book. It says, before you do the Shema, it says it is customary during the recitation of the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, Vayomer, Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Lemor, to kiss the tzitzit at each mention of the word tzitzit as a formal expression of our love. I mean, I don't really know what a formal expression of love really means. But the fact is that when you go to a lot of synagogues, you will see people, when it comes time for the 3rd paragraph, they'll hold the tzitzit in their hand. And when they get to the word tzitzit, you'll see them kiss it. as they do this. This is, it's a widespread custom now, but it's a custom that has a history of being different in different communities, particularly between the Hasidic communities and their opponents, the mitnagdim, or the heroes, from my point of view. But the Hasids did have the strong sense of kissing the tzitzit every time that they'd said it, and the mitnagdim hated it, and they railed against it. And they were able to cite in their opposition to this custom the writings of the Geonim, authorities that lived in Babylon in the 8th and 9th centuries, that weren't upset about kissing the tzitzit, but they were upset that some people in the course of the Shema would hold on to their tzitzit. I mean, they were wearing a toga or something, so they would reach down and pull it up, and they would hold it in their hands. They probably couldn't kiss it because they'd have to pull their pants up too high. But this is a controversy between different Jewish communities, and I don't see any reason to disparage the custom. People can do it if they want to do it. I take some umbrage the fact that a conservative Siddur, which was a movement founded by and for mitnagdim, doesn't say that there are different customs here and you should decide what you want to do. That the fact that it says that this is customary and implies that it's a universal custom is not the case. There are different feelings about how this should be done. My rabbis never made out with their tzitzit, and I don't do it either. If other people want to do it, that's gesinter hate. That's it's not my mission in the world to yuck people's yum. But if you see. I mean, I've had the occasion to see people who did not know what they were talking about, upbraid Jews who did know what they were talking about because they weren't kissing their tzitzit, and that's unfortunate, and that's a consequence of movement publications not making it clear that this is a custom for some, but not a universal custom for everyone. This is going back to my let 1,000 flowers bloom. If you want to kiss your tzitzit, please kiss your tzitzit at will. If you don't do it, as is my custom, that's also fine. And so I hope that covered the questions that we had in the first round. And we'll have a second round of discussion where people can share any observations or practices that they have with their tzitzit, what they like about them, or what they'd like to see more or less of. But I'll also deal with any questions that people have about the presentation.
I've puzzled for a while, Rabbi, and this is kind of almost a silly question. But if you wear the Tlat Katan with the fringes out, but you have your regular shirt over it and tucked into your pants, how do you get the tzitzit out? I guess I have to ask somebody who wears it.
What if they're tucked into your pants?
If your regular shirt is on top of your Tlat Katan and your regular shirt is tucked into your pants, how do you get the tzitzit to show?
Well, you got to untuck all your shirts. I can answer that one. I can answer that one. What I can't figure out, and what I've never really asked people, is what do you do if you have a Tlat Katan and you need to use like a public restroom or something?
Another good question.
Because we have this idea that you don't bring your Tlat Gadol in there with you. I think we might have signs on our restroom saying "Don't bring your talis into the restroom." And I mean, if you have a Tlat Katan on, are you obligated to like take your shirt off before you go in, Or is there some, I mean, I know they don't do that. I know that they go in there with their tzitzit on, and they have some reason to believe that that's okay. And, you know, I don't want to, I mean, hanging out watching people in their restrooms is probably a bad idea from the criminal law point of view. So I don't do that, but I always wanted to ask, so what's the official procedure? You have a Tlat Katan on and you need to use a public restroom. If you're at home, you can take your shirt off and go in. But if you if you're out and about, what do you do? Rabbi Baron, do you know what you do?
Well, I did used to wear a Tlat Katan for a number of years, and it was hard to get used to wearing, especially in hot weather. But I don't want to go too graphic into it. But no, you go to the restroom. If you have to sit down in the restroom, you kind of gather the four corners, kind of like you do at shul, so it doesn't get messy or drop and get wet. That's as much as I'll say.
Well, what about Don's question? Because if you tuck in your regular shirt that's on top of the other one, do you have to make holes in your regular shirt so that the seat?
Yeah, that's also a whole art of how you wear it, because it's kind of tucked in, but then you still tuck the tzitzit out. So most of the shirt is in, but the fringes are still out. And then I had some people would take them out, but then would stuff them in their pockets, so they're kind of visible, but they're not flopping around. So different people have different ways, but it's kind of like a learned art of how to get dressed and letting just the fringes go out while the rest of the thing is tucked in. You have to like try it to see how it works. It's messy.
We got a question from Sarah's iPhone. I read that women wearing the talit at the Western Wall were arrested. Is it the view that women can wear them in an American perspective, or is this a difference in religious views? It's not a difference between America and Israel, but when you visit the Western Wall, you recognize that it is both sort of a national monument, but it is also a Haredi synagogue. It's a synagogue operated by Haredim, and they enforce Haredi perspectives regarding not just the separation of men and women, but they take umbrage with women do roles that in Haredi society are not considered to be proper for them to do. And they sometimes, and on many occasions, the police have been called and the police have taken women away from the Western Wall who were doing prayer services. And part of what they were doing, they were wearing talisim. My comment is I don't think the Western Wall should be a Haredi shul. I don't think it should be a synagogue of any kind. I think it's a national monument, but it's difficult to know what to do, and it's difficult to from America to make prescriptions to it, because Israeli society. There is religious diversity in Israel, but the wider Israeli society, including secular Jews in Israel, do not regard the egalitarian varieties as legitimate. So even though the police that are making the arrest are doing it at the behest of the Haredi operators of the shul, they have the support of basically most of Israel in doing so. That even if you're a secular, for the secular Jews in Israel, the religion that they don't observe is the Haredi version of it, and that's why the situation at the Western Wall is so difficult. But there are certainly synagogues in Israel in which women wear proudly, and it's partially an Israeli American perspective, but it's mostly a vision of different visions of Judaism that exist both in America and in Israel.
In our shul, you often see it if a woman who is not wearing a tallis is called to the bima for an aliyah, or a man for that matter who's not wearing a tallis. When they go up on the bima, someone hands them a tallis before they say the prayers. Was there something special about reading from the Torah that requires or suggests that you should wear a tallis?
Not that's more sociology than halacha, but every synagogue I've been at, even if they weren't policing what the men did in their seats, there was the feeling that if you ascend to the bima, it's appropriate to be wearing a tallis, that it's considered to be disgraceful to the community for somebody to be in the position of leading services and not have the full garb on. And so that's the thinking behind the enforcement. And you also, I mean, you also hear the desire of some in our synagogue where we're very lenient on this, but we recognize that people have feelings about this. The question will arise on, say, Monday morning: can I give an aliyah to a Jew, to a man that's not wearing tefillin? There's no halakha that says only he who has his tefillin on may ascend to the Torah to receive an aliyah. That's not a halakha, but there's a sense about the standards of the community that, our standard is that a man who comes to services should be wearing a tallis and tefillin, and that will be enforced in terms of who's called up. It's a reflection of it's a statement that the synagogue wants to make about how we feel people should come to synagogue, and that's not a trivial matter. That's not a trivial matter. I think that usually in order to police the women too, there's not a requirement that women will wear a tallis, but they'll say that women need to wear a head covering. They have to put on those little doilies or something before they come up and they have an aliyah. That's the same sort of sensitivity. There's not a halakha that a woman needs to have her head covered if she's having an aliyah. If considering that there's not a lot of halakha about women having aliyahs at all, but there's not a halakhic basis for that. That's a sense of decorum. It's a sense of decorum.
I have a question. What about, they say that you wear the talit during the day because it says ureitem oto, and you will see it. What about at night? Do you wear it also, like, for example, Erev Yom Kippur?
Well, so that's, I mean, Kol Nidre is the one time in the evening where it's customary for people to wear a tallis. So we don't usually wear them at Mariv. Otherwise, and when Yom Kippur ends, you'll see that we've been wearing our tallis all day before we do Mariv, because Mariv is not on Yom Kippur, it's the next day. We usually make a big deal of taking our talisim off. So there is a sense that as a ritual matter, as a ritual practice, the talit is not worn in the evening. The exception, I mean, the only exception I can think of is Shabbat as well. For Shabbat services, the leader of Mariv services for Shabbat wears a talit, but the leader of Mariv services does not wear a talit on weeknights. So there's ritual. There's just a sense of ritual propriety there.
Mm-hmm.
So before we say goodbye, I want to note that Rabbi Barone is having a class this coming Monday evening at 8 o'clock on this channel. And it will be about the Parsha and the Oral Torah, and it will be wonderful like it always is. I will be on at 7:30 if people are interested in doing the text in a Charuta fashion, which simply means that we read the text to each other and we tell each other what we think it says. we try to guess what Rabbi Barone is going to subject us to in the class. And I think that for people that are looking for learning that's less frontal, that's less lectury and is more, let's talk about what we think about this. I think the Chevruta study is a wonderful opportunity, but the shiur at 8 o'clock is wonderful too. And I encourage people to come and to bring your friends. For a week from yesterday, next Wednesday, we're starting a bi-weekly class. We're going to meet every other week on Wednesday nights, an introduction to Judaism class that will go throughout the entire year. And there are details of this class in the bulletin. The book that we're using is called Living Judaism by Rabbi Wayne Dosnick. And I look forward to, we've got a lot of interest in the class. I hope you consider attending. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I appreciate everyone for signing on tonight. I've enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed hearing what you've had to say about the tallis, and I hope I covered your questions well. And have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Laila tov.